Kody Brown has 18 children. For years, that number was the whole story. 18 kids, 4 wives, 1 house, or actually several houses, and a television network willing to film all of it. The sheer scale of it was the pitch. More love, more family, more legacy. That was the brand. That was what the show sold, season after season, and honestly, for a while, it worked. People tuned in. The number 18 felt like an achievement. It felt like proof of something. But here's the thing about numbers. They don't stay still. And in 2026, the number that actually defines Kody Brown's life is not 18. It's a much quieter number. It's the count of grandchildren he actually sees. And that number, nobody on this show has had the nerve to say it out loud yet. If this kind of deep dive content is what you're here for, hit that like button right now and subscribe to SisterWives Crew, because we go where the cameras don't. Now, let's get into it. When SisterWives premiered in 2010, the premise was radical by mainstream television standards. 1 man, 4 women, 1 family. All of it plural and proud and unashamed. Kody Brown stood in front of America and essentially said, "Watch what a big family actually looks like when you build it intentionally." The children were practically a supporting cast. They were evidence. Every birthday party, every family meeting around a giant table, every road trip crammed into multiple vehicles. It all pointed toward the same argument. This works. This produces something real. This is a legacy. And legacy, in the context of that show, was always measured in people, not in property values or spiritual growth or personal happiness. In people, in children born, in family dinners attended, in grandchildren eventually produced. The legacy was demographic. It was supposed to compound over time the way a good investment does. You put in the work in Generation 1, and Generation 2 multiplies it for you. That was the unspoken promise running underneath every episode. What nobody stress-tested, not the producers, not the audience, and apparently not Kody, was whether legacy actually works that way. Whether you can build a family at scale and then assume the scale maintains itself. Whether 18 children are 18 guaranteed relationships, or 18 relationships you have to actually tend to, individually, one at a time for decades, without dropping them when things get complicated. Spoiler, it's the second one. It has always been the second one. And Kody Brown, it turns out, was much better at starting relationships than sustaining them. Here is where we need to get precise, because precision is what separates this conversation from the usual fan speculation. Kody Brown has 18 documented children across his 4 marriages. With Mary, he has 1 child, Leon, who came out as transgender and now uses he/him pronouns, and who has been publicly and pointedly distant from Kody for years. With Janelle, Kody has 6 children. Logan, Madison, Hunter, Garrison, who passed away in early 2024 in an event that shook the entire SisterWives community, Gabriel, and Savannah. With Christine, he has 6 children: Aspyn, Mykelti, Peyton, Gwendlyn, Isabel, and Truly. And with Robin, he has 5 children: Dayton, Aurora, Brianna, Solomon, and Ariella. That's the full inventory. 18 human beings who call Kody Brown their father. Now, let's talk about what's happened to that inventory since the family began fracturing publicly. Christine left in 2021. She has since married David Woolley, relocated, and by every documented account, she and her children have built an entirely separate orbit. Aspyn is married to Mitch Thompson, and they have children of their own. Mykelti is married to Tony Padron, and they have multiple children: Avalon, Archer, and a 3rd child born more recently. Gwendlyn is married to Beatriz Queiroz. Isabel and Truly are adults, or near adults, navigating their own lives. And Peyton, who has been vocal on social media and in interviews, has been one of the more candid Brown children about the dysfunction inside that family. Here's where the ledger gets uncomfortable. Mykelti has multiple children. Aspyn has children. There are documented Brown grandchildren in this family. Real kids, with birthdays, with milestones, with first words and first steps that are happening right now, in real time in 2026. And the question sitting in the middle of all of this is deceptively simple. How many of those moments has Kody Brown actually been present for? Not invited to, not theoretically welcome at, actually present for. on camera, in a photo, referenced by the mother of those children as a grandparent who shows up. Search Kody Brown's documented presence with his grandchildren. Look at his social media. Look at the social media of Mykelti, of Aspyn, of the other Brown children who are now parents themselves. Count the posts. Count the tags. Count the times Kody appears by name, by face, or by reference in the documented life of any grandchild from Christine's side of this family. The silence in that search is not nothing. The silence is data. This is the trap Kody has built for himself. And I want you to understand why it's so structurally airtight. There are only two possible explanations for the absence of documentation. Either Kody is deeply involved with his grandchildren and simply chooses not to share it publicly, in which case, why not? This is a man who put his entire family structure on television for 15 years. Privacy was never the brand. Or Kody is not deeply involved with his grandchildren, and the absence of documentation reflects the absence of presence. Which one do you believe? Because here's what I've observed across years of watching the show. Specific relationships produce specific evidence. When Christine and David Woolley got close, there were photos. When Janelle went to her daughter-in-law's events, there were photos. When any of the Brown children genuinely connected with someone, that connection generated documentation. That's how human beings work. We photograph the people we love. We post the moments that matter. We say names out loud. Kody talks about his family in generalities. He loves his children. He loves his grandchildren. He wants to rebuild. He's hopeful. These are the statements of a man who does not have specific recent memories to point to. Specific recent memories generate specific language. I was at Avalon's birthday last month and she... That's what engagement sounds like. What we hear instead are statements so broad they could apply to any of the 18 children, and none of them simultaneously. Now, I want to be careful here, because I think the honest analysis of Kody Brown requires more than just cataloging his failures. The more interesting question is why. And my read, and I want to flag this clearly as interpretation, not documented fact, is that Kody hasn't lost contact with his grandchildren because he stopped loving them. I don't think that's what happened. I think what happened is more mundane and more painful than that. The path to Kody's grandchildren runs entirely through his adult children. That's just biology. Mykelti's kids are Mykelti's kids. To be in their lives, Kody has to be in Mykelti's life. To be in Mykelti's life in a real, present, consistent way, Kody has to have done the work of repairing or maintaining that relationship. And Mykelti, like her siblings, was raised by a father who, at least in the documented years of this show, prioritized Robin's household, deprioritized Christine's household, and then watched his marriage to Christine collapse anyway. Mykelti watched that. She processed it. She formed conclusions. Gwendlyn has been arguably the most publicly candid of the Brown children about her relationship with Kody. She's described him as a father she had complicated feelings about. She's been clear, in her own content and in interviews, about the emotional distance that developed. Gwendlyn is not a villain in this story. She's just someone who grew up, assessed the relationship she actually had with her father versus the relationship she was supposed to have, and responded accordingly. And this is where I want to slow down and say something that I think often gets missed in the fan conversation about this show. Kody Brown raised his children with a stated value system that included authenticity, personal agency, and the right to form their own beliefs. He said this on camera, repeatedly, across many seasons. He wanted children who thought for themselves. He wanted children who were strong. He got them. He genuinely got exactly that. His children are, by multiple documented accounts, opinionated, independent, and clear-eyed about their own needs. The boundary they've set? That includes him. He built the tool that is now being used to maintain distance from him, and there's something almost Greek tragedy about that. Except it's not ancient Greece. It's a reality show in 2026, and the cost is counted in grandchildren he isn't watching grow up. Let's talk about what the other mother's situations look like by comparison, because the contrast is important. Christine's world, since her departure and remarriage, has expanded. She and David Woolley have a documented, visible relationship with her children and grandchildren. Mykelti has publicly expressed warmth toward her mother. Christine appears in the orbit of her grandchildren's lives in ways that are documented, photographed, and referenced. Her family got smaller when she left the plural marriage, and then it grew back. That's not an accident. That's the result of her consistently showing up. Janelle's situation is different and genuinely heartbreaking in its own way. The loss of Garrison in 2024 changed her family permanently, and nothing in this analysis should minimize that. But Janelle's documented relationship with her living children, Logan's wedding, Madison's ongoing life, her presence in her children's milestones, reflects a woman who stayed connected even through enormous pain. Mary has built something quieter but real. Her relationship with Leon is complicated by documented tensions. But Mary has also been transparent about working on herself, building her own identity outside of the marriage that defined her for years, and finding community. Whether that translates into a warm grandparent relationship with Leon's future family remains to be seen. But Mary is doing the visible work. And then there's Kody, who has Robin and 5 children with her, and an inventory of relationships with his other 13 children that exists somewhere between estranged and undefined, with most of the publicly visible data pointing toward estranged. Here's the part of the math that doesn't bend. This is the part I really need you to sit with, because it doesn't get discussed enough. Adult children can reconcile with a parent. That door is never fully closed as long as both people are alive. A 30-year-old who is estranged from their father can, at 35, decide to re-engage. It happens. It requires work, and it requires willingness from both sides. But it's possible. People do it. Grandchildren cannot be unborn. The milestones that pass cannot be reattended. The first birthday that came and went without a grandfather present doesn't get a do-over. The holidays that accumulated without him in the room don't go back on the calendar. Every year that passes between Kody Brown and the grandchildren he isn't present for is a year that is permanently subtracted from whatever relationship they might eventually have. A grandchild who is 3 years old now will be 6 before long. They'll be 10. They'll be old enough to have formed their own impression of whether their grandfather is a person who was present in their life or a name their parents mentioned cautiously at Thanksgiving. The window for being the fun grandparent who shows up at the park and at the recitals and on ordinary Tuesdays, that window is not infinitely large. Children form their attachment maps early. If Kody is not on the map, he will eventually have to introduce himself to kids who have already figured out who matters to them. Walk that math out far enough, and you start to understand why I called this a point of no return. Not because reconciliation is impossible, but because with every passing year, the relationship Kody would be building if he started today would be a different, smaller relationship than the one that was available to him 5 years ago. The show, for its part, has not addressed this directly, and I think that's a deliberate editorial choice. Putting the grandchild inventory on screen, naming the grandchildren, documenting which ones Kody has met, asking him directly about his relationship with Mykelti's kids, that's a segment that produces either a very uncomfortable answer or a very obvious deflection. Neither one is flattering. So instead, we get the broad strokes. Family is complicated. Kody is trying. Relationships take time. Time, though, is exactly what we're talking about. And time, in this context, is the one resource being spent regardless of whether the work is happening. I want to close this by pulling back to the biggest frame, because I think the full weight of this story only lands when you see it from a distance. Plural marriage, as Kody practiced it, and as this show documented it, was always premised on a specific theory of family. The theory was that more love, more adults in the household, more children, more structure produced more stability and more legacy than the nuclear family model. That was the argument. That was what Kody and his wives were running at scale, on camera, for 15 years. And the scale produced a result. The result is documented. It's in the public record, in the social media accounts of the adult children, in the documented presence or absence of grandparent-grandchild relationships, in the fact that 3 of the 4 wives have moved on 2 to different men, 1 to a rebuilt solo life, and the family that was supposed to be the proof of concept for the whole theory is now a man, 1 wife, 5 shared children, and an ever-growing roster of grandchildren he may or may not be in regular contact with. The thesis got stress-tested. The stress test produced data. The data is what it is. I'm not saying Kody Brown is irredeemable. I'm not saying the relationships are all permanently destroyed. I'm not even saying that what happened was entirely his fault. These situations are always more complex than a single villain explanation allows for. What I'm saying is that the demographic story of this family in 2026 is not the story the show was sold as, and the distance between the original pitch and the current reality is the most honest accounting of what plural marriage at this particular scale actually produced. 18 children. an expanding number of grandchildren, and one grandfather whose documented presence in their lives does not match the scale of either number. That is the headline, not the fights, not the divorces, not the real estate decisions or the theological debates or the arguments about equity between households that consumed so many seasons of camera time. The headline is the demographic math, and the math, in 2026, does not lie. The show used to count Kody's family by how many were in it. The new count is harder. It's the count of who still picks up the phone, who invites him to the birthday party, who posts a photo that includes him, who says grandpa in a video that ends up online. That number right now is not a number TLC is going to put on screen. So I am. And that number is the whole story. Drop a comment below leaving a grandfather emoji if you think Kody still has a real path back to these kids and grandkids. Leave an hourglass if you think too many years have already passed on too many of these relationships for it to look like what it could have been. I read every single comment on this channel, and I genuinely want to know where you all land on this one. And I need you to know if you made it this far, you are exactly the kind of viewer this channel exists for. We don't do surface-level takes here. We don't recap what you already watched. We follow the data. We follow the demographics, and we follow the story underneath the story. Next video, I'm doing a full Brown family demographic deep dive, generation by generation. Every documented data point I can find, every marriage, every grandchild, every publicly known estrangement, laid out in a single complete picture. It is going to be thorough. It is going to be specific, and it is going to be the most complete accounting of what this family actually looks like in 2026 that exists anywhere on this platform. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Hit the bell. Share this with one person who watches this show and thinks they already know the whole story, because I promise you, they don't. I'll see you in the next one.